At 11:20 on the morning of October 20-6, 1940-2, on the southern ridge of Guadalcanal, a legend that would shock the world was unfolding. Private First Class Mitchell Paige fed the last belt of ammunition into his Browning .30- caliber machine gun. The barrel was scorching hot, steam hissing from the water jacket, while just 30 yards away in the jungle, Japanese soldiers advanced with bayonets fixed. He had been fighting continuously for 9 hours. His entire squad was gone, every other man killed in action. Ammunition was depleted, no rifle, no grenades, just 7 rounds left in his .40-5 caliber sidearm. The Japanese would overrun the position within minutes. If the ridge fell, Henderson Field would fall, and Guadalcanal would fall with it. But Paige did not retreat. He picked up a Type 90- machine gun from a dead Japanese soldier at his feet, grabbed ammunition strips from scattered ammo boxes, and turned the weapon meant to kill Americans against its original owners. For the next 3 days, Paige held this critical defensive line alone, armed only with weapons captured from the enemies he had killed. When he was finally relieved, he had confirmed 30-8 enemy kills, most of them made with Japanese weapons. When a man runs out of ammo, he uses the enemy's weapons to keep fighting. This is the story of Mitchell Paige. Mitchell Paige was born in 1918 in the small town of Charleroi, Pennsylvania. In those days, the Great Depression cast its shadow over every American family, and a young man's options for making something of himself were limited. In September 1930-6, just turned 18, Paige walked into the Marine Corps recruiting station and signed his enlistment papers. He completed boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, a crucible where drill instructors forged every recruit's will and body with the harshest standards. After training, Paige was assigned to the 4th Marines stationed in Shanghai. During his 3 years in Shanghai, Paige honed his infantry tactics and weapons skills to perfection, earning expert qualifications on both the Garand rifle and the Browning .30- caliber machine gun, and was promoted to Private First Class in 1930-9. While in Shanghai, Paige had his first close encounter with Japanese weapons, having seen displays of Japanese military equipment in camp, but he never imagined that one day his life would depend on those very weapons. After the Pacific War began, Paige landed on Guadalcanal with the 7th Marines on September 18, 1940-2, 6 weeks after the initial invasion. The 1st Marines had already seized the airfield and renamed it Henderson Field, but the Japanese were counter-attacking furiously, landing reinforcements every night and launching repeated assaults to retake the airfield. The entire island had become a massive meat grinder, with both sides paying in blood for every inch of ground. The 7th Marines' mission was to reinforce the defensive perimeter around the airfield. Paige's H Company was assigned to defend a ridge south of the airfield. This ridge ran east to west, about 400 yards long, overlooking the valley and dense tropical jungle to the south. Intelligence indicated the Japanese would attack from this direction, as the valley provided a natural concealed approach route. The company dug in along the ridge, and Paige's machine gun squad was positioned on the left flank of the company sector, right at the junction with the adjacent battalion. This was precisely the weakest point in the entire defensive line. Paige personally supervised the construction of the position. The Marines dug a machine gun pit 3 feet deep and 6 feet wide, mounted the 90-3-3-pound Browning with its tripod and water jacket, and aimed the barrel to cover the valley and southern approach routes. They built overhead cover with logs and sandbags, dug secondary positions for the ammunition bearers, registered firing sectors, and recorded firing data on key terrain features. Paige was meticulous about every detail, knowing full well that on the battlefield, the quality of a position meant the difference between life and death. By October 20-4, the position was complete. Paige's squad had stockpiled 30-200 rounds of 30- caliber ammunition, 8 grenades, 6 Mohn Garand rifles and Page's own 40-5 caliber sidearm. They were ready, but no one knew what kind of storm was coming. On October 20-5, intelligence arrived that a massive Japanese force was advancing toward the southern perimeter, estimated at 5,000 to 7,000 strong, belonging to the elite 2nd Division. This division had been invincible on Asian battlefields and was regarded by Japanese Haikun and as the trump card for capturing Guadalcanal. The Japanese plan was to attack at night, break through the Marine lines, and seize Henderson Field. Once the airfield fell, the Japanese could deploy bombers and fighters. American warships would be driven from the area, and the Marines on the island would be cut off from supplies and annihilated. This was not just about winning or losing a battle. It was the critical turning point of the entire Pacific campaign. At 2:30 in the morning on October 20-6th, the attack began. Japanese artillery and mortar rounds rained down on the Marine positions like a torrential storm. The entire ridge shook with explosions, the bombardment lasting a full 30 minutes, earth and debris flying everywhere. Then the infantry charged, thousands of Japanese soldiers pouring through the jungle toward the ridge, wave after wave, screaming, rifles and machine guns spitting fire, bayonets glinting in the moonlight. The Marines returned fire, Page's machine gun suppressing targets at ranges of 50 to 200 yards, the Browning hammering out long bursts of 10 to 15 rounds. Paige aimed at the densest clusters of Japanese troops. The machine gun's killing power was devastating, Japanese soldiers falling in groups, but more kept coming, trampling over the bodies of their comrades. The battle raged for hours, muzzle flashes in the darkness like fireflies from hell. At 5:15 in the morning, a Japanese mortar round landed 5 yards from Page's position, the blast sending dirt and shrapnel sweeping across the pit to ammunition bearers hit by fragments, their uniforms soaked with blood as they were urgently evacuated. Page's squad was down to 4 men himself, the assistant gunner, and 2 ammunition bearers. At 6:30, another mortar round scored a direct hit on the position, killing the assistant gunner instantly and wounding another ammunition bearer who was evacuated. The squad was down to 2 men, Paige and ammunition bearer John Topman. They exchanged a glance, no words needed. The message in their eyes was clear: they would not retreat. At 7:40-5, Japanese troops broke through the Marine line 100 yards to Page's right, and an entire platoon of Japanese infantry worked their way behind Page's position. Paige and Topman were surrounded, their retreat cut off, no reinforcements coming. Paige decided to hold his ground. If he pulled back, the Japanese could advance unopposed along the ridge, the entire company line would collapse, and Henderson Field would be directly exposed. Paige kept firing. The machine gun was overheating, the water in the cooling jacket boiling, steam hissing from the seams. Paige poured water from his canteen into the jacket to keep the gun running, and when the canteen was empty, he urinated into it, because on the battlefield, staying alive was the first priority. He had 6 ammunition belts left, 1,500 rounds. At 9:20 in the morning, Topman was hit by a Japanese rifle bullet through the chest. Blood pouring from the wound, Topman collapsed beside Paige, eyes still open but already gone. Paige was now completely alone. He had for belts left 1,000 rounds. The Japanese pressed from the south and flanked from the east. Paige was taking fire from 3 sides. He switched to short bursts to conserve ammunition, firing only at the closest targets and those who appeared to be officers. Every round had to count. He had no ammunition to waste. At 10:30-5, Paige fired the last ammunition belt. The machine gun fell silent. The silence in that instant was more piercing than the gunfire. The Japanese soldiers saw the machine gun stop and began advancing in bounds, assuming all the defenders were dead. Paige drew his sidearm and fired at the nearest Japanese soldier. Hitting him, the man went down. He fired again. Another fell. 5 rounds left, 3 hits. The Japanese soldiers fell at the edge of the position, but more were coming, bayonets gleaming in the sunlight. Paige dropped the pistol and vaulted out of the machine gun pit. 30 yards away, beside a dead Japanese soldier, lay a Type 90- to machine gun with ammunition strips scattered nearby. Paige crawled forward through mud and shell casings, every second risking a bullet, rounds whistling over his head, dirt splashing on his face. He grabbed the Type 90- to in the ammunition strips, dragged them back to the position, inserted a strip into the feed, racked the bolt, aimed at the advancing Japanese, and squeezed the trigger. The Type 90- barked with a sound completely different from the Browning. 7-7 rounds tearing through the air, Japanese soldiers falling in the hail of fire. They were stunned. This was their own weapon firing at them, and that confusion and fear spread through the Japanese ranks. The brief chaos gave Paige a moment to breathe. He swept the foremost enemies from the position, but more Japanese were flanking from the sides. Paige leapt from cover again and captured a Type 90-, 9 rifle and 60 rounds from another dead Japanese soldier. Back in the position, he fired the rifle with precision at approaching enemy troops, every round carefully aimed. He could not afford to waste a single one. When the rifle was empty, he went out and grabbed another. When the grenades ran out, he searched Japanese bodies for Type 90- 7 grenades, pulled the pins, and hurled them at the enemy formations. By 1 in the afternoon, Paige had captured 3 different Japanese weapons: the Type 90- to machine gun, the Type 90- 9 rifle, and the Type 100 submachine gun. He placed these weapons at different positions around the perimeter, creating the illusion that multiple Marines were defending the ridge. It was a desperate gamble, but it worked. The Japanese could not pinpoint his location, taking fire from multiple directions. They mistakenly believed they faced a solid defensive unit rather than a single, ammunition-starved soldier. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the Japanese launched another attack, about 40 soldiers advancing up the southern slope. Paige fired the Type 90- 2 from the original machine gun pit. Then, after emptying 1 ammunition strip, quickly moved to another position 30 yards away and fired the Type 100 submachine gun. Then moved again. The Japanese could not find him, but their men kept falling, fear and frustration spreading through their ranks. The assault was repelled after 20 minutes. Paige killed 7 Japanese in this wave of attacks. He wielded the enemy's weapons more effectively than the enemy themselves, the ultimate tyranny. At 5 in the afternoon, the setting sun painted the ridge blood red, and Paige heard English voices calling out. A patrol from G Company was working its way along the ridge from the west, the company commander having had no report from Paige's position for 6 hours and assuming it had been overrun. The patrol found Paige still at his fighting position, surrounded by Japanese dead, weapons, and ammunition, the entire position like a charnel house. Paige was wounded. Shrapnel from a grenade had struck his left arm and shoulder, blood soaking half his sleeve, but adrenaline had kept him from feeling the pain. The patrol leader asked about the rest of his squad, and Paige calmly said they were all dead. Asked how long he had fought alone, Paige said since 9:20 that morning, 8 hours. Asked what weapons he had used, Paige pointed to the Japanese rifles, machine guns, and submachine guns scattered around the position, the weapons still stained with their original owner's blood. The lieutenant said Paige needed medical attention, but Paige said the Japanese would attack again after darkened this position had to be held. He could not leave. The lieutenant called for reinforcements. At 6:15, a rifle platoon from G Company arrived to relieve him. Paige briefed the platoon leader on the terrain, Japanese approach routes, and captured weapons, even personally demonstrating how to operate the Type 90- to machine gun, how to load, aim, and clear jams, explaining every step clearly. Then he was sent to the battalion aid station. Medical personnel treated Paige's wounds, removed the shrapnel, cleaned and bandaged the injuries, administered morphine, and told him to rest. Paige refused. He said the Japanese would attack again, and he had to get back to his company. At 10:30 that night, the Japanese indeed launched another assault on the ridge. Paige heard the gunfire and left the aid station without authorization, dragging his wounded body back to the position. G Company's rifle platoon was in a fierce fight, Japanese soldiers charging wave after wave, the Marines' ammunition running low. Paige grabbed a .30- caliber machine gun and fired into the darkness at the Japanese. When the bullets ran out, he picked up a rifle and kept fighting. The battle raged until 3 in the morning on October 20-7th, when the Japanese finally withdrew and the Marines held the line. Over the next 2 days, Paige remained at the position, his wounds unhealed but refusing to be evacuated. The Japanese launched for more attacks on October 20-7th and 20-8th, and each was repelled. By October 20-9th, Japanese casualties were so heavy they had to withdraw from the area. The battle for Henderson Field was over. The Marines had held Guadalcanal, and Paige had written the most incredible chapter in military history. During the entire battle, Paige fired thousands of rounds from both American and Japanese weapons, with 30-8 confirmed enemy kills. The battalion commander nominated Paige for the Medal of Honor, and the nomination was approved. On May 20-1st, 1940-3, Paige was awarded the Medal of Honor at a ceremony in San Francisco. The citation described his extraordinary heroism and exceptional valor when the enemy broke through the line. When all of Paige's comrades had been killed or evacuated wounded, he held the position alone, and after American ammunition was exhausted, he used captured Japanese weapons to continue fighting, repelling multiple enemy assaults. Paige was the second Marine to receive the Medal of Honor during the Guadalcanal campaign, and his name was forever etched into the glorious halls of American military history. After the campaign, Paige was sent back to the United States to participate in war bond promotional tours. He visited 20-8 cities, telling the story of Guadalcanal to thousands of Americans. At every stop, audiences were stunned by the young warrior's heroic deeds. But Paige did not enjoy life in the spotlight. He was a fighter at heart, not a speaker. He repeatedly requested to return to combat, and in 1940-4, his request was granted. He participated in the campaigns for New Britain, Palalia, and Okinawa, and was promoted to Sergeant Major. After the war, Paige continued to serve in the Marine Corps until his retirement in 1960-4, having served for 20-8 years. Paige's story was not widely disseminated after the war, partly because military publicity focused on larger scale battles, and the details of Paige using enemy weapons were glossed over in initial reports. It was not until 1950-5 that a military historian studying the Guadalcanal campaign accidentally discovered detailed records of Paige using Japanese weapons. The historian interviewed Paige himself and tracked down witnesses who confirmed the story. According to the historian's research, of the 30-8 confirmed Japanese kills, approximately 10 to 15 were made with the Browning machine gun before American ammunition was depleted, and the remaining 20-3 to 20-8 were all killed with Japanese weapons. The historian published a monograph in 1960-2 with a chapter dedicated to Paige's use of enemy weapons, titled Fighting with the Enemy's Weapons. The book received positive reviews, but did not attract widespread attention. In 1980-7, the Marine Corps declassified Captain Dieter's post-battle report, and several historians wrote articles about Paige's use of Japanese weapons, noting that this feat was not fully represented in the Medal of Honor citation. After the war, Paige chose to remain in the Marine Corps. He served at multiple bases, training generation after generation of young Marines, passing on the battlefield experience he had earned with his blood. In the days as an instructor, Paige often personally demonstrated tactical movements on the training field. Young recruits looked at this gunnery sergeant with scars on his body, their eyes full of reverence. In 1950-9, Paige retired with the rank of gunnery sergeant. 20-3 years of military life. From a naive recruit to one of the most respected sergeants in the Marine Corps, Paige spent his whole life interpreting what loyalty and dedication mean. After retirement, Paige returned to his hometown in Pennsylvania and lived a quiet life. He rarely talked about the war, and neighbors did not even know he was a Medal of Honor recipient. In their eyes, Paige was just a quiet, retired old man who took a walk in the park every morning and occasionally said hello to neighbors at the community grocery store. No one knew that this seemingly ordinary old man had once created a miracle of military history with enemy weapons on a lonely island in the Pacific. In the year 2000, 80-old Paige was invited to give a speech at the Marine Corps Heritage Center in Quantico, Virginia. Facing about 200 Marines, historians, and veterans, Paige spoke for 40-5 minutes. A young Marine asked Paige if he had ever received training on Japanese weapons. Paige said no, he had seen Japanese weapons in China before the war, but had never received formal training. He was forced to learn. When you are surrounded in doubt of ammunition, you learn fast. Another Marine asked Paige if he recommended that modern Marines receive enemy weapons training. Paige said absolutely. You never know what situation you will face on the battlefield. You might be cut off, you might run out of ammunition, you might need to use any weapon you can find. If you cannot operate those weapons, you will die. On November 15, 2003, Mitchell Paige passed away at the age of 80-5. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, the resting place of America's greatest heroes. The Medal of Honor was displayed at the funeral. More than 500 Marines attended, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps personally delivered the eulogy. The eulogy detailed Paige's heroic actions on Guadalcanal, specifically mentioning his feat of holding the position alone for 8 hours using Japanese weapons. After the funeral, the Marine Corps updated its training syllabus. All machine gunners must now receive family Azerian training on weapons, covering operation, maintenance, and ammunition identification. The training course was named the Enemy Weapons Family Azerian Course, named after Mitchell Paige. From then on, every Marine Corps machine gunner had to learn to identify and operate potential adversary weapon systems while learning to operate American weapons. The lesson Paige earned with his life was permanently integrated into the Marine Corps training system. The Marine Corps Museum at Quantico established a special exhibit for Paige's story, with displays including the Type 90- machine gun, the Type 100 submachine gun, and the Type 90-9 rifle. Every visitor who pauses to look can feel the thrilling history from these cold pieces of steel. The inscription reads, "Private First Class Paige proved that a Marine can fight with any available weapon. When American ammunition was exhausted, he used enemy weapons were also exhausted. He would use stones. Marines never give up." This is Mitchell Paige, a machine gunner who never stopped fighting even when ammunition ran out, a Marine who was surrounded and cut off but refused to retreat, a warrior who used the enemy's weapons to kill the enemy for 3 days because he had no other choice. Paige killed 30 Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal, most of them with their own weapons. He proved a truth on the battlefield: the weapon is far less important than the person using it. A trained soldier can fight with any weapon. A determined soldier will fight with every weapon he can find. Adaptability, resourcefulness, determination — this is the legacy Mitchell Paige left for future generations. When the situation changes, you change. When you are alone and surrounded by enemies, you keep fighting. Paige's story tells us that the most powerful weapon on the battlefield is never guns, but the unquenchable fighting spirit deep within a person's heart. This spirit transcends weapons, transcends equipment, transcends the disparity in numbers. It is the most invincible force in the human spirit, and the most profound revelation this brutal war left for future generations. Even in desperate straits, even unarmed, as long as there is still faith in the heart, one will never truly be defeated. This young man from a small town in Pennsylvania used his entire life's actions to tell the world true courage is not being fearless, but choosing to hold your ground in the face of fear. Thank you for learning about this history. May we always remember those heroes who wrote legends with their lives.